People who stay quiet in public groups aren't actually quiet. What most people don't realize is that silence is rarely about having nothing to say. It's usually about seeing too much. You're sitting in a group, everyone's talking, laughing, interrupting each other. Conversations overlap, voices compete, people trying to be heard. And you're just there, watching, listening, not because you can't speak, but because your mind is already working ahead of everyone else. You're noticing things others miss, the hesitation before someone answers, the forced laughter, the subtle shift in tone when someone feels insecure. You don't just hear conversations, you see patterns, and that changes everything. Because once you start seeing people clearly, you can't go back. Psychologically, this is heightened awareness. Your brain isn't just hearing words, it's decoding intent. You don't just listen, you interpret. And that creates a delay, because before you speak, your mind filters everything. How will this sound? Is it necessary? Does it even matter? And by the time you decide, the moment has already passed. But here's the part nobody talks about. Quiet people are not slow thinkers. They're fast thinkers who process deeply. Most people speak to think, but you think before you speak, and that difference is why you often stay silent. Because when you really think about it, you realize how much conversation is just noise. And this is where it gets interesting. You don't struggle with speaking, you struggle with meaningless speaking. If it's surface level, you lose interest. If it's repetitive, you check out. If it adds no value, you stay quiet. Not because you're shy, but because you're selective. You've learned that not every thought needs to be said, and not every environment deserves your energy. So instead of forcing yourself to fit in, you observe. You study people, who interrupts, who listens, who changes depending on the room. You notice what others ignore. And because of that, you don't trust easily, not because you're cold, but because you see too clearly, and that awareness creates distance. Not physical distance, but mental distance. You're there, but not fully involved, present, but detached. And people misunderstand that. They think you're shy, they think you lack confidence, they think you don't have anything to say. But in reality, you just don't feel the need to prove yourself. You don't speak to impress, you don't compete for attention. You don't fill silence just to feel included. And that's something most people don't understand, because in today's world, being loud is often confused with being confident, and being quiet is seen as weakness. But that's not true, because real confidence doesn't need constant validation. It doesn't need to dominate conversations. It doesn't need to be seen all the time. Sometimes, real confidence looks like silence. And this is where it gets deeper. Many quiet people didn't start this way, they became this way. Through experience, they spoke before and were misunderstood. They opened up and were ignored. They trusted and were disappointed, so they adapted. They learned to observe first and speak carefully, or sometimes not at all, because silence feels safer than explaining yourself to people who won't understand anyway. And over time, that becomes who you are, the observer, the one who listens more than they speak, the one who understands more than they show. And here's something most people will never realize. You feel more than you express. You process everything internally, deeply, constantly. And sometimes that gets exhausting, because while others release their thoughts instantly, you carry yours longer. You analyze them, replay them, question them, and sometimes you overthink them, which is why silence isn't always peaceful. Sometimes it's loud inside your own mind. But even then, you stay composed because you've learned control. Control over your words, your reactions, your presence. And that control is power, but it comes with a cost, because the more aware you become, the harder it is to connect on a surface level. Small talk feels empty, shallow conversations feel draining, and real connection becomes rare, and sometimes that feels lonely. You're surrounded by people but still feel alone. Not because no one is there, but because no one sees things the way you do. And that's the quiet reality. You're not disconnected, you're just operating on a deeper level. You don't need constant interaction, you need meaningful interaction. You don't need attention, you need understanding. And those are not the same thing. You're the kind of person who notices everything but says very little. And when you do speak, it matters, because you've already filtered everything out, you've already thought it through, so your words carry weight. And that's why your silence isn't empty. It's full of thoughts, awareness, and understanding. You're not quiet. You're selective. And in a world full of noise, that kind of silence is power. If this felt familiar, you're not the only one. Follow for more.